Welcome back to week 9 lecture. Oftentimes our infrastructure definition files are written in either JSON or YAML file formats. And I want to just briefly cover both of these file formats because they are so commonly used in our IT organizations, and particularly with infrastructure definition, and oftentimes with our software applications. It's very common today to find software applications which are interchanging information or exchanging information using JSON file streams or data streams. We'll see applications that use YAML files to store configuration. And it's absolutely essential that you understand uh, the uh, the format of both JSON and YAML files. If you're a software developer, you probably are already intimately familiar with these formats, and this is just sort of um, a uh, a brief review for you. So JSON or JavaScript object notation is a very lightweight data interchange format. We oftentimes use it to send information, to send and receive information between different application components and services. We can also use it to store information. And you've already encountered this semester on things like homework assignments and class projects. I've asked you to create JSON files that contain data that's the result of an output from an API command. JSON is relatively easy for us humans to read, and it's very easy for machines and applications to parse. It's it's a format which we call self-describing, in the sense that the format itself just describes the object. And it's based on a subset of the JavaScript programming language. So if those of you who have done any sort of JavaScript development know that JSON plays a very strong role in JavaScript programming. But besides the fact it comes from JavaScript, it's really a language independent data format, and you see it widely used by everything from .NET to Java to Go applications. JSON is built on two different data structures. You have name value pairs. You have ordered lists. Those are really the only two structures that you need to think about. When you're creating values within a JSON object, those values can be things like strings or numbers. It could be a whole complete separate object. It could be an array. It could be Boolean values like true or false. It could be a null value. And when you're looking at the JSON object syntax, if you look at any of the documentation out on the internet, and if you look at the official JSON documentation, you will encounter these sort of diagrams and these syntax diagrams. And the way you read them is from left to right. So a JSON object must begin with a left curly bracket, and then you follow one of these paths. So if you follow this top path, it takes you to a right curly bracket in the end. So an empty object essentially is just a set of curly brackets. Within the set of curly brackets, then you can put a key value pair. So a string with a colon separator and then a value. And you can have multiple key value pairs that are separated by a comma. That's how you read this sort of diagram. Here's examples of JSON objects. We have a JSON object, again, that's enclosed by a set of curly brackets, and we have two strings, a name and a value. Here's a set of key value pairs enclosed by curly brackets. We have one where the key is work, the value is target. Another one where the key is home, the value is Minneapolis. So that's the key value. That's the key value object. We can also create arrays, and arrays are ordered collections of values. Each array begins with a left square bracket and ends with a right square bracket. And in the middle, we have a value. And remember, a value can be a set of key value pairs. A value could be another object. Let's look at a couple examples. Here we have an object. It has a key called employers, and it has a value which is an array. And that array is an array of string values, Target, Cargill, and Medtronic. We can also nest these values. So it's like nesting an object within an object. So here we have an object. It's got a key called employer, and the value is another object. And the object which is embedded has two keys, name and employees. The second key, employees, the value of that key is an array of strings, John, Miguel, and Heather. Based on these two sorts of objects, these key value pairs and arrays, we can build up very complex data structures using JSON. And if you look at the official documentation, you'll see all kinds of diagrams which describe different ways that you can create JSON objects. And I'm not going to review every possible way here. You can go out and look at that documentation if you have questions. The second data type that I want to look at, data file format I want to look at, is YAML. YAML stands for YAML Ain't Markup Language. It's one of these funny recursive names where the name YAML is actually part of the acronym for the name itself. So the idea behind YAML is that JSON is really meant more for machines and programs and for data serialization. And wouldn't it be great if we had something that was like super simple and even more human readable than JSON? And so out of that was born YAML. YAML follows many of the same rules as JSON in terms of the objects and the values which are supported, because you can actually convert a JSON file to a YAML file and vice versa. When you're creating a YAML file, typically the file ends in .yaml or .yml, just like JSON files typically end with .json. YAML files are case sensitive. YAML doesn't allow tabs. You should be using spaces instead. In fact, anytime you're doing editing using some sort of code editor, you should enable the setting which converts tab characters into spaces automatically for you. The tab character is evil, and you should not ever be using it in software coding. And why this is important in terms of a YAML file is because in a YAML file, white space matters. So things like spaces and indentation matters in a YAML file. Indentation has meaning, and just by changing the indentation of a line of code in a YAML file, you could completely change the way that data is being interpreted. So you have to be careful and make sure you understand the meaning of those spaces. When you're creating a YAML file, traditionally we would begin by putting 3 dashes at the very top of the YAML file, of the data, in the YAML file. So that's optional. You don't have to do it, but I still do it as a practice. So when adding my data to a YAML file, the first line in that YAML file will be these 3 dash characters. And if you go to YAML.org, you can see a whole list of specific requirements that are too exhaustive to really cover here. The YAML data types are similar to JSON data types. Again, you can convert one to the other. You have things like scalars, like integers, strings, floats, Boolean values. You have sequences or arrays. Here's an example where we have an array of animals, and the array begins with dash characters, so dash cat, dash dog, dash goldfish. There's a space between the dash and the animal name, but this set here represents an array. Another way to write an array is to use something that looks more like a JSON array, where you have fish, colon, and then square brackets around a set of values. That's also another way to describe an array. And then finally, we have key value pairs, or what YAML calls mappings. Sometimes we call them hashes. Here the key is animal, colon, pets, and pets is the value. This is a key value pair. Let's look at a quick example showing how you might convert JSON into YAML, or what the YAML file looks like as compared to JSON. So these two data files are describing the exact same object. And on the left, we have the object described as JSON. On the right, we have it described as YAML. YAML data begins with 3 dashes, and then we have a key called breakfast menu, and that key is associated with 2 objects, one which are key values, one which is food, the other is waffles. The food key is associated with an array, and the array contains basically one object, which is this Belgian waffles. It has a price and it has a description. And the same thing is being described on the left-hand side with the JSON object. Now, which one of these is more readable to you? I think most people would say that this YAML format on the right-hand side is probably a little bit easier to read for us humans versus on the left-hand side, we have the data items being separated by things like curly brackets, and we have to kind of keep track of the curly brackets to see which data items are grouped together. Now, the benefit of the JSON format is that we don't have to worry about white space. We don't have to worry about indentation. You see the data is indented here, but that's just purely for readability reasons. This could all be in one big line, and our application wouldn't care because it would be able to parse it properly. YAML, on the other hand, YAML, this indentation and this white space is absolutely critical. And if we were to change the spacing of this indentation and these lines, we would actually change the object. We would change the data, in a sense, and the way that it's being interpreted by our application.